Let us look at the various issues related to permafrost thaw. It is an important process. Why? The hydrological process and geomorphological processes are affected because of the permafrost thaw. And how do they impact? Basically, they impact the ecology, biogeochemical cycling, water resources, infrastructure maintenance and development. All these things are impacted. And what is the recent observation? One is the temperature increase. There is a SWIPA report and AMAP 2011 report talks about increase in the permafrost temperature across the Arctic region, and also high regional variation in climate warming rates and magnitudes has been reported. And what actually happens is basically the active layer changes. That means increase in the thickness of the active layer. What is active layer? It is the area which basically melts during the summer. So if the active layer increases, means what actually happens is whatever is the frozen ice is now completely gone and it becomes basically a thick soil. So the progressive increase over Eurasia and Central Alaska is being recorded. And similarly, recent loss of permafrost in lower altitude sites are also happening. And what are the consequences? There are various consequences. One is in the landform, ecosystem, biological cycling and infrastructure. All the areas are affected. So in the landforms, what happens is the ground becomes slumping and the slope becomes unstable. So these are all the problem because the ice beneath had actually melted. And how it affects the ecosystems? Drying of wetland habitat happens because wetland becomes dry. That is a major change. And pond formation in some areas, which may be a positive one. Biogeochemical cycle, when we look at it, increases the methane emission from new wetlands and also releases significant amount of carbon stored in permafrost. So this may be a major problem. And with respect to infrastructure, there is an impact on coastline and with ice-rich unconsolidated materials. So if we focus more about the biogeochemical processes, the first one is the carbon cycling. The exchange of carbon between permafrost, vegetation, atmosphere and water bodies with permafrost containing twice as much of carbon as the atmosphere. So there is an exchange that takes place between permafrost and vegetation, atmosphere and water bodies. With respect to methane emission, the release of methane due to anaerobic decomposition of organic matter in the thawed permafrost. So this is the microbial activity increase. This is the major problem and it is actually estimated that it will increase by 30 to 70% by 2100. And with respect to nutrient cycling, the cycling of nitrogen, phosphorus and other nutrients influenced by permafrost thaw, it affects the plant growth, soil fertility and ecosystem productivity. And with respect to the microbial activity, we already saw methane emission is one of the major problem. The activity of the bacteria, fungi and other microorganisms involved in the decomposition of nutrient cycling with the microbial communities basically adapting to changing permafrost conditions. So that means they become more active in the increase of temperature due to permafrost thaw and global climate change. With respect to water cycling, the movement of water through permafrost affects the biogeochemical reactions and nutrient transport. This influences the hydrological process in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. We just saw the processes related to permafrost thaw. Now we are going to look at the impact of this particular process. So carbon is released. So what will happen? The thawing releases stored organic carbon. This increases the carbon dioxide and methane emissions. So this potentially leads to feedback loop amplifying the climate change. So this is the major impact. And with respect to methane feedback, the increased methane emissions contribute to further climate warming, a positive feedback. And this accelerates the permafrost thaw and greenhouse gas effect also. And with respect to the nutrient dynamics, when there is a change in the permafrost condition, this actually affects the nutrient availability and the cycling, especially in the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. This affects the plant growth, microbial activity and the entire ecosystem functioning. And with respect to how it affects the microbial communities, This actually shifts the microbial communities due to the thawing influence of biogeochemical processes and ecosystem functions. And how it alters or affects the hydrology, the change in the water flow patterns affect the nutrient transport and everything. So these are all the various impact of the permafrost thaw on biogeochemistry. What is the feedback mechanism? We have been seeing only the positive feedback. The first one is the climate feedback. Then we have ecosystem feedback. Then we also have human feedback. So what is the climate feedback? The permafrost thawing releases greenhouse gas contribute to global warming, which in turn accelerates permafrost thaw, creating a feedback loop, that is a positive feedback loop that again amplifies the climate change. With respect to the ecosystem, the changes in the biogeochemical processes alter the ecosystem structures, which in turn releases, because of the increased microbial activity, where methane is released, so that increases the greenhouse gas emissions, and this also leads to a positive climate feedback. And with respect to human beings, the people who are living especially in the Arctic region, their infrastructure, land use and the livelihood are all affected because of the permafrost thaw. And it also influences the biogeochemistry, creating complex socio-economic feedback loops. That means because of the increase in the temperature, the sea ices are decreasing. Similarly, the permafrost is thawing. So the infrastructure is affected. And similarly, the animals which live on these areas are also getting affected. So the people who hunt these animals are also getting affected because the animals no longer live in this particular region. So how people or scientists are studying about that? One is the research and monitoring. We can do field studies. We can also do computer modeling. Then remote sensing, interdisciplinary approaches are the various major areas where we can focus on studying the permafrost thaw. So field study means we can go to the area and study the permafrost dynamics, greenhouse gas emissions, biogeochemical processes in the natural environment. These all will provide essential data to understand and predict the permafrost related changes. Modeling, as we know, computer simulated models can be developed, and remote sensing satellites actually give the clear picture of what is actually happening. Infrared pictures actually can tell the temperature of the ground. So from that we can also see how the active layer is changing. And similarly, interdisciplinary approaches include integration of geology, ecology, climatology and other areas in understanding this particular change. What are the risks and uncertainties? Mainly the methane release is the major problem. And here we will be looking at the permafrost, how it affects the different regions in the Arctic. So the infrastructure stability basically affects the Siberia, that is the Russia region, Alaska region and northern Canada. So that means this is the major activity which affects the human population in this area. It is followed by carbon storage. So the carbon storage is mainly affecting the countries like USA, Canada and Russia. And of course, this also makes avenues for research opportunities for various people. So especially Norway, Canada, USA, Russia people, research scientists are actually taking up lots of research work to understand how the permafrost thawing is happening. And this is also leading to a cultural significance for Greenland, Canada, Alaska and Russia. And the ecosystems that are affected include the countries from Finland, Russia, Greenland and Norway. And the climate feedback is of course mainly in the northern area, Canada, USA and Russia. And finally, the hydrology in the case of Canada and Alaska, the permafrost affects completely.